Chapter 1 Prologue. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Early winter, 1787. Versailles East Palace, a young man sat in a room dripping with gold rococo decorations and oversized oil paintings. He shook his head, a wry smile twisting his lips as he stared at the test in front of him. The light from a massive crystal chandelier, easily 6 feet across, danced across his fair skin and delicate features, making him look like a real-life version of Paris from those paintings. Beside him, an old man in a white, curly wig and lace scarf sighed. Brown eyes flashed with disappointment. He leaned in and offered, "Your Highness, if you're having trouble, perhaps a refresher on the fundamentals." The young man, addressed as, "Your Highness," seemed to snap out of a daze. He politely corrected the old man, "Mr. Lagrange, I think you misunderstand. I meant this as the graduation exam for your course, not an entrance exam." Indeed, this unassuming little old man was none other than the founder of analytical mechanics, a pioneer in group theory, and the celebrated French mathematician and physicist known as the Prince of Mathematics, Lagrange himself. Graduation assessment. Lagrange frowned, studying the 13-year-old boy before him. "Your Highness, I teach university-level courses." "I'm afraid." Several richly dressed young aristocrats, also busy with their own exams, turned to stare, their curiosity piqued. A 16-year-old, decked out in a silk coat and lace collar, couldn't resist a sneer. He called out loud enough for everyone to hear, "Your Royal Highness, last I checked, you still had 2 years left of basic courses." He gave the old man a nod. "Mr. Lagrange always says that the ladder of mathematics must be climbed one step at a time. If you reach too high, you'll fall flat on your face. I'm sure His Royal Highness remembers that lesson." Ignoring him, the young man spoke earnestly to Lagrange. "Sir, I've been studying college mathematics independently. I really need to take the graduation exam." The old mathematician sighed, helpless. He turned to his assistant. "André, please bring the exam paper from the bottom of my folder." "Of course, Professor." Soon, several test papers were placed before the young man. He quickly scanned them. The difficulty had definitely been cranked up a few notches compared to the previous one, but it was mostly still high school level, with a touch of calculus thrown in. Nothing to really sweat over, because, just over 2 weeks ago, he'd been a second-year graduate student in the 21st century. He'd been in France with his advisor for a wind turbine project when he'd taken a tumble from the tower. He woke up to find himself in the body of King Louis XVI's eldest son, Louis Joseph. Maybe it was the time travel, but Joseph had been born a few years earlier than in the history books, making him 13 years old now. Under Lagrange's watchful eye, Joseph quickly started scribbling down the answer to the first question. But his mind was racing with the impending disaster of the French Revolution. The royal family would be toast. As the prince, he definitely wasn't going to get out of this one. King Louis XVI was good for nothing but fixing locks. France was drowning in over 2 billion in debt, while raking in a measly 500 million annually. The government was broke, civil servants went unpaid, and foreign trade had come to a grinding halt. Colonies were crumbling. To fill the empty coffers, the cabinet kept hiking taxes, squeezing the commoners dry while the tax-exempt nobles lived high on the hog, drinking and feasting without a care. And on top of all that, next summer France would get hammered by hailstorms, compounding the effects of previous droughts and triggering a nationwide famine. Then would come the hungry riots, the storming of the Bastille, and the whole shebang. The country would be turned upside down, and heads would roll, literally. So, to keep his own head, he needed to do 3 things: fix France's financial mess, secure enough food to prevent mass starvation, deal with the self-serving nobles, and watch out for the British and Prussians who were circling like vultures. The famine was just around the corner in July. That gave him only a little over 6 months. He rubbed his forehead, frustrated. Being so young, he couldn't get involved in government affairs. His hands were tied. What a nightmare. His chances of survival were slim. Nearby, the stern-faced young man saw him rubbing his forehead and smirked. He obviously couldn't figure out the questions. He was just embarrassing himself. Why was he the crown prince, and not him? While plotting how to stay alive, Joseph rattled off the answers, finishing the first page in record time. He flipped the page eagerly. Passing Lagrange's exam meant he'd completed his studies at the University of Paris. Just over 2 weeks ago, he'd suggested to Queen Mary, his cheap mother, that he get involved in politics to try and avert the coming train wreck. But she'd politely turned him down, telling him to focus on his studies and wait for the right moment, so he'd made a deal with the Queen. He could officially join the political fray after completing his courses at the University of Paris. Of course, with his knowledge, he was a freaking genius compared to everyone else in this era. He'd already aced most of the subjects in the last couple of weeks. The hardest part had been unlearning all the incorrect information that people believed was true. Lagrange watched the crown prince scribbling away, ignoring the other students. His eyes widened. This was a question that would take an average University of Paris student 5 years to answer. The crown prince was whipping through it effortlessly, his reasoning crystal clear. A correct answer. He was only 13 years old and self-taught. Lagrange was floored. Had another Leibniz been born? Lagrange shot a glance at his assistant, wondering if André had somehow leaked the answers to the crown prince. After all, the prince's behavior was just too bizarre. Even a prodigy like Leibniz hadn't started college until he was 14. He grabbed a pen and paper, jotted down a few lines, and handed it to Joseph. Your Highness, no need to do the rest. Just complete these questions, and I'll consider you to have passed. The stern young man snorted to himself. Lagrange was just trying to let him off the hook easy. What a royal suck-up. He'd find a way to expose the crown prince's exam later and show everyone what a fool he really was. Joseph looked at the paper, surprised. Only 5 questions. The difficulty hadn't changed, but the number of questions had gone down. Score. He quickly knocked out the first 2. Then he got to the third. Please write the proof process of Rawls' theorem. He knew this cold and started writing without thinking. Rawls' theorem. Let f be continuous in the closed interval, a, b, and differentiable in the open interval, a, b. If f, a, equals f, b, then there is at least one point in the open interval, b, where the value of its derivative function is 0. Proof, because the function f, x, is continuous within, a, b, the maximum value, m, and minimum value, m, are obtained in a closed interval. Joseph had barely finished when he noticed Lagrange's rapid breathing. He looked up and saw the old mathematician staring at the exam paper, his eyes filled with passion, like he was looking at his first love. Joseph quickly glanced back at the question. Did I mess something up? Lagrange snatched the test paper, carefully reading the proof process several times. He mumbled, so it's also true for differentiable functions. Why didn't I think of it? He looked back at Joseph, his eyes burning. Your Highness, how did you come up with this idea? Isn't it? Joseph suddenly realized that Rawls only proved that between 2 adjacent real roots of a polynomial equation, the equation has at least one root. It wasn't until the 19th century that anyone generalized it to a microfunction category. Oops, slipped up, ahem. He quickly grabbed the test paper and changed the subject. Mr. Lagrange, I'm going to do the next 2 questions. Chapter 2 Son of God's Favorite. You are listening at novelfull.audio. No way, you don't have to. Lagrange grabbed Joseph's shoulders, practically vibrating with excitement. This derivation alone proves what you can do. I'm heading back to the university today to get your degree sorted out. Thank you so much. Joseph was ecstatic. He wriggled out of the old mathematician's grip, gave him a quick salute, and bolted for the door. Lagrange, ready to launch into a speech, realized his audience had already fled. Surprised, he took off after him, calling out, How on earth did you come up with the idea of differentiable functions? I need to know. Inside the classroom, the other students exchanged bewildered glances. Finally, someone piped up, Wait, did he just say the crown prince graduated? I think so. But he just showed up today. A young man with a severe expression glared at Joseph's retreating form, muttering, "No way, he had to have cheated." André just rolled his eyes subtly and threw Lagrange's question back at him. The professor made up the questions on the spot, and His Highness's proof is a completely new mathematical breakthrough. If you think cheating can accomplish that, Duke of Chartres, maybe you should give it a try. The Duke of Chartres stared at the formulas, completely lost. He felt like he'd been struck by lightning. He always considered himself a top dog amongst the young royals, and now he couldn't even follow someone else's proof. Could Joseph's earlier cluelessness have been an act, all to make him look foolish? He clenched his fists. "Just you wait, Joseph. I'll make you eat dirt eventually." Joseph, of course, was oblivious to this conversation. Even if he had heard it, he wouldn't have cared less. It was just kids squabbling. All he could think about was that he finally had a chance to get involved in politics and how to fix France before things blew up. His mind was racing. Lagrange caught up with him, completely winded, and peppered him with questions for what felt like forever. Suddenly, he felt like he was onto something big from the Crown Prince's proof, and he muttered to himself, "What if F(a) isn't equal to F(b)?" He repeated it, his brow furrowed in concentration, then hurriedly said goodbye to Joseph and rushed back to the university's office. As Joseph watched him go, he murmured, "If F(a) is not equal to F(b), that's your Lagrangian mean value theorem. Good luck proving it a few years early." Once the old mathematician was out of sight, he waved to the attendant who'd been trailing him. "Emin, where's the Queen right now?" The tall, blond young man bowed quickly. "Your Highness, the Queen is in her tea room." Joseph nodded, turned, and started running down the wide corridor. The sudden burst of exercise made him cough, and he remembered that his pneumonia wasn't completely gone yet. The original owner had been pretty frail, and even after a month, he still hadn't shaken it off. He waved to Emin, who was hurrying to catch up, to show he was okay, and kept going for another few hundred feet before he finally reached the Queen's tea room. "From today on, I can finally put my skills to work and save myself." He took a deep breath, pushed open the doors between the guards, and strode inside. In the warm, elegant tea room, Queen Mary, with her towering hairdo, fair skin, and stunning blue eyes, was sitting in an armchair, documents in one hand and a cup of tea in the other. She was listening attentively to a minister, clearly dealing with affairs of state. Louis XVI spent most of his time tinkering in his lock-making workshop, so the Queen handled most of the governance. Joseph sighed inwardly. Louis XVI was actually a pretty decent guy for a king, but he'd inherited a country that was already falling apart. Plus, he wasn't much of a leader and had this thing for locks. Eventually, the people were in dire straits, and everything went to hell. In better times, Louis would have been a well-loved king. Joseph actually felt sorry for him and wanted to save his life if he could. The master of ceremonies announced, "The Crown Prince has arrived." Following proper protocol, Joseph stepped back with his right foot, touched his chest, and bowed to Queen Mary. Then, he greeted each of the ministers in the room. Finally, he bounced forward and announced to the Queen, "Mom, I passed my college math exam." Queen Mary's eyes lit up. She put down the documents and took his hand, beaming. "Joseph, you've made me and your father so proud." She'd already had someone check on the Crown Prince's grades and confirmed that he'd passed everything with flying colors, except math. In other words, he'd finished all the coursework at the University of Paris. She looked at her son with a mixture of pride and disbelief. "Why did you keep this a secret, studying on your own? You could have had the best tutors." To explain his sudden transformation, Joseph had to come up with a story about studying in secret for years. "Because," Joseph said bravely, "I wanted to surprise you." "What a wonderful surprise." The Queen picked up a strawberry-filled pastry and popped it into his mouth, then lovingly stroked his slightly curly hair. "How do you fit so much knowledge in that little head of yours?" Nearby, a tall, thin man in dark blue patterned clothes with sapphires around the collar, frowned and asked the minister next to him in a low voice, "Bishop Bryant, did the Dauphin just say he passed college mathematics?" The latter nodded. Apparently. How is that possible? I'm just as shocked. Behind them, the Queen's personal secretary whispered, "It's not just mathematics. His Highness has completed over 10 courses in physics, chemistry, geometry, and English at the University of Paris." Several ministers' eyes widened. How can that be? I believe the Crown Prince is only 13 years old, isn't he? Incredible. Indeed, the secretary said. The teachers who taught him all call him God's gift. God's gift? With such a talented Crown Prince, France will shine even brighter. God bless France. Joseph, ignoring the minister's flattery, pulled away from the Queen and said eagerly, "Your Majesty, as agreed, I can now participate in politics, right?" Queen Mary nodded fondly. "Yes, my genius son. Oh, I think you should get some experience at the Paris City Hall first." Joseph frowned. He wanted to fix France. He wanted to prevent the mob from slaughtering his entire family. What good would City Hall do? Work on city transportation. Sewage. He had watched a bunch of documentaries about the French Revolution, and he knew that France's core problem was financial. The corruption of officials, the inability to provide aid during crises, the disloyalty of the nobles, all stemmed from the financial mess. So, to fix France, he had to start with the money. Joseph looked at the Queen and said tentatively, "Maybe the finance minister's office would be a better fit for me." Queen Mary smiled indulgently. France's financial problems were a nightmare. Ever since Louis XVI took the throne, the government and the public had been obsessed with solving the financial crisis, but they'd never been able to make any headway. How could a 13-year-old boy, even a God's gift, possibly take on such a huge burden? She lost her smile, considered for a moment, and said, "Joseph, if you're interested in finance, perhaps you could start at the Paris tax office." Joseph knew she didn't believe in him, which was fair enough considering his age. He'd have to settle for second best. Then, could I be the assistant to the finance minister? That the assistant at that time was basically the deputy chancellor of the exchequer, the second in command when it came to finances. Chapter 3 Heading to Paris, please collect. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Before the Queen could respond, a tall, thin man with icy eyes cleared his throat and stepped forward. "Your Majesty," he said, "did I understand correctly that you intend to have the Crown Prince participate in government?" Queen Mary tilted her head. "Yes, Duke of Orleans. I agreed with the Dauphin that once he finishes his university studies, he's welcome to contribute to state affairs." The Duke of Orleans' eyes narrowed. The Crown Prince has always seemed so. Why this sudden surge in competence? Was he just faking it before? If so, what's he planning now? Regardless, his own years of maneuvering had weakened the royal family's prestige, making their position increasingly precarious. A genius Crown Prince would undoubtedly restore public confidence in the monarchy. That's a problem for me. I need to nip this in the bud. Without hesitation, he declared, "Your Majesty, the Crown Prince is still young and lacks practical experience. Wouldn't it be more prudent to have a senior minister mentor him in political matters for a few years before he takes on official duties?" Queen Mary frowned slightly. The Duke of Orleans had a point. Despite the Crown Prince's obvious talent, he was only 13. If he stumbled in matters of state, it could damage his reputation. She glanced at her son, her tone hesitant. "Joseph, perhaps some more study would be beneficial." Joseph shot a look at the Duke of Orleans. Having traveled from the future, he knew the man's game all too well. Louis Philippe, cousin to Louis XVI. He might seem like a loyal patriot, but he and his father before him were secretly dedicated to overthrowing the royal line and seizing the throne. In fact, after the French Revolution, when the Girondins were deciding whether to execute the king, the Duke of Orleans voted for execution, sealing Louis XVI's fate with a vote of 301 to 300. His vote was the deciding factor that sent Louis XVI to the guillotine. Joseph hadn't expected him to intervene so quickly. He countered without backing down, "Your Majesty, Joan of Arc was my age when she led our armies to victory against the British 3 centuries ago. She proved herself through action. Please, trust in my abilities and give me a chance to do the same. Orleans, with feigned sincerity, insisted, Your Highness, affairs of state are serious matters. Confidence alone isn't enough. Joseph cut him off with a dismissive wave. Duke Orleans, this is between Her Majesty and me. Please don't interrupt. He turned back to the Queen. Mother, if I can assist the finance minister, surely I can learn from Bishop Bryant. Several cabinet ministers exchanged surprised glances. They hadn't expected the young crown prince to challenge the Duke of Orleans so openly. Even the Prime Minister usually consulted with him. The Duke of Orleans was taken aback by Joseph's disrespect. Stunned for a moment, he finally sputtered, Finance is the lifeblood of France. We can't let inexperienced youths meddle in such crucial matters. Several ministers nodded in agreement. Seeing this, Queen Mary, observing the Crown Prince's determined face, finally relented, but with conditions. Joseph, you'll start by serving at City Hall. If you prove yourself capable, we can discuss involving you in financial matters. Joseph glanced at the 7 or 8 cabinet ministers in the room. He knew that with them present, convincing the Queen would be impossible. He'd have to put in his time at City Hall. He nodded. Yes, Your Majesty. The Duke of Orleans attempted to protest again. Your Majesty, the Crown Prince should focus on his studies first. That's settled, Queen Mary interrupted, raising a hand. Turning to Brian, she said, please continue with the tax law reforms. Joseph listened to the rest of the cabinet meeting, gaining a deeper understanding of France's financial woes. 90% of the discussion revolved around money, or rather, the lack of it. After the meeting, the Queen insisted on rewarding him, treating him to a variety of desserts. It wasn't until his throat was sore from the various cakes, puddings, and colorful macarons that he was finally dismissed. Joseph left the tea room, his mind heavy. He couldn't help but think that he might be following in Louis XVI's footsteps. Arriving at the king's chambers, he was informed that Louis XVI was working on a masterpiece and hadn't left his lock-making workshop in 3 days. Joseph sighed. With a father like that, how could he not end up at the guillotine? Forget it, Shirley, probably bursting with enthusiasm, would probably try to send him to the Queen, and that would boomerang. He shook his head, a wry smile on his face. He turned to Iman. Have the carriage prepared. We're going directly to the Paris City Hall. Yes, Your Highness. As Joseph exited the Palace of Versailles, he noticed over a dozen carriages lined up in the marble courtyard, with 60 or 70 people standing respectfully beside them. He facepalmed, recognizing them as the Crown Prince's personal entourage, beauticians, chefs, tailors, and so on, seemingly intending to accompany him. No wonder so many carriages. Joseph quickly instructed Iman to send them all back. Taking that crowd to City Hall would be chaos. Then, he eyed the silver royal carriage. Elegant and adorned with intricate reliefs and gold wire, it was the epitome of luxury. After a moment's thought, he turned and climbed into an ordinary carriage used by the entourage. If he traveled in the royal carriage, he wouldn't have a moment of peace. Soon, 3 gray-black carriages left the Palace of Versailles Square and headed east. The Palace of Versailles was located in the western suburbs of Paris, a 3-hour drive from the city. Bored in the carriage, Joseph yawned. Catching sight of a stack of books on the wooden table, he picked them up. It was information about the Paris City Hall. He looked at Iman, who smiled and touched his chest in a salute, confirming that he had arranged it all. The Crown Prince's butler needed to be on top of things. Joseph smiled and nodded, then began to read. The information was detailed, covering everything from the City Hall's personnel structure and functions to its daily operations. On the 3rd page, Joseph saw that the police department fell under the City Hall's jurisdiction. He eagerly scanned the information, confirming that the Paris police were entirely under City Hall's control, and his eyes lit up. This trip to City Hall might not be a waste after all. At least I can reform the Paris police. For the common people of France, disorder and crime were the second greatest scourge after crippling taxes. Being pickpocketed or robbed was commonplace. Home invasions, murders, and kidnappings were not unusual. Gangs exploited and oppressed citizens, a major blight on Paris. At the time, Europe lacked a modern police system. Public security relied on citizens protecting themselves. Solving crimes was nearly impossible. Crime was rampant, and ordinary people lived in constant danger, therefore, police reform was crucial. Solving public security problems would greatly improve social stability, which, in turn, would reduce the public's desire to kill the royal family. Joseph finished reviewing the City Hall information, carefully considering how to improve the police force. The carriage entered Paris, and the stench from the window hit him like a physical blow. The new book has been signed through internal investment, and I beg you to invest in this book. With tears in my eyes, the young author is looking forward to the 100 investment recommendation, so I will give it to you first. Chapter 4: Solve a Case Casually. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Joseph yanked open the curtains and frowned. Since arriving in this world, he'd been stuck taking exams at Versailles. This was his first real look at Paris. It was nothing like the thriving European metropolis he'd imagined. The buildings were grimy and ancient, the streets awash in mud, sewage, and even human waste. That's where the smell was coming from. Dead animals occasionally floated down the Seine, and the workshops along the river dumped wastewater of bizarre colors into the river, turning it brown. Vendors crammed their stalls haphazardly on both sides of the street, choking what little space there was. Kids chased each other, flinging mud and shouting. Curses flew back and forth. Fistfights were commonplace, and passers-by ignored the screams of those getting beat down. Some people even robbed others in broad daylight. Only when Joseph ordered his guards to intervene did the robbers scatter into the alleys. And this was supposedly the Louvre area, with the best security in Paris. In short, the whole city lacked any romantic vibe, let alone the spark of the Industrial Revolution. Forget any Enlightenment ideals. Though Versailles and Paris were close, they seemed worlds apart. As the carriage passed the Seine's north bank, the coachman gave a soft whoa, and the carriage rolled to a stop. "Your Highness, we're here," Iman said with a bow, then got out and opened the door for Joseph. Joseph, whose butt was practically numb, climbed down the steps his entourage had set up. He looked up at a nearly 300-foot wide building, its exterior walls covered in statues and boasting a huge number of columns and arched windows reaching from floor to ceiling. The magnificent building looked like a giant castle in the heart of Paris, a statement of the feudal class's absolute power. City Hall had been expecting the crown prince. All the officials, big and small, had gathered in the square outside the main entrance, lined up to greet him. But the silver royal carriage they were waiting for never showed. Instead, 3 drab, dark carriages pulled up in front of the City Hall's main entrance. Iman got out of the first. Louis, the head of the Paris Municipal Commission, twitched and quickly signaled to everyone around him. "Quick! It's His Royal Highness." Louis clutched his black tricorn hat, waddled forward on his stubby legs, and herded his 200-pound frame along. He led the crowd to Joseph and bowed deeply. "Your Royal Highness." The musicians finally snapped to attention and started playing a hurried tune. Louis introduced himself, then pointed to a middle-aged man beside him, whose grey-blue eyes and sharp cheekbones seemed about to cut through his skin. "Your Highness, allow me to introduce Lord Viscount Flysel, President of the Paris Chamber of Commerce." Joseph sized the man up. He'd learned from the briefings that while Louis was the official mayor of Paris, Flysel was the real power player. The government was broke, and it relied on funding from the Chamber of Commerce to keep things running. Plus, the Chamber of Commerce's connections could solve a lot of problems, making its president extremely influential. Flysel stepped forward and bowed. "Your Highness, we've prepared a banquet for this afternoon. We hope you enjoy it." Joseph hated the banquets and dances of this era. All the complicated etiquette and rules were torture, but he couldn't avoid them. He nodded. "Thank you very much." In the spacious, luxurious City Hall banquet hall, servants bustled back and forth. The table groaned with expensive dishes. Cold dishes were whisked away and replaced instantly. While sipping and chatting, Joseph endured the endless flattery from the officials, but he kept thinking about cleaning up the police force. "Your Highness, you mean to get involved in managing the police?" The pudgy mayor glanced at the Chamber of Commerce president in surprise, then hastily apologized to Joseph. "Your Highness, someone of your stature shouldn't have to deal with thieves, murderers, and the like." The Chamber of Commerce president nodded in agreement. "Yes, and the police department is full of trivial, boring matters. He's just here for show, don't take this seriously. If he messes with the police system, there will be riots in Paris." He thought. Joseph felt a little helpless. As he argued with the two men, a woman's piercing voice suddenly rang out from outside the city hall. "No. Leonard didn't commit suicide. You have to catch the murderer." Her voice wavered, becoming shrill, then turning into a mournful aria. "Leonard was so cheerful. We were getting married next month. How could he kill himself? The case can't be closed. The murderer is still out there." The pudgy mayor's face darkened. "Why is she here again?" he muttered angrily. Flizel immediately waved vigorously at a guard. "Get her out of here. Don't you see who's here today?" He turned back to Joseph with an apologetic smile. "Ah, Your Highness, she's just a crazy woman. Please don't let her upset you." Joseph looked out the window and asked, "I heard her mention a murderer." "What's the story?" Mayor Louisbel hurried to explain. "A month ago, her fiancé, Viscount Leonard, supposedly committed suicide by swallowing a sword. Oh, the case is closed and there's absolutely no doubt, but this woman's gone off the deep end. There's no way it was murder. She's become so disruptive that we've had to ban her from City Hall, but she still shows up every few days to shout outside." Joseph raised an eyebrow. "Suicide by swallowing a sword?" The skinny man sitting to Louisbel's right puffed out his chest. "Your Highness, you just put the hilt of the sword on the ground, put the tip in your mouth, and then push down hard, and the sword will go right through the back of your neck. It's a pretty common way to go." Joseph recalled that the pudgy mayor had introduced the man as Viscount Guizot, the Paris police chief, who was responsible for the entire Parisian police force. Seeing that the Dauphin seemed interested, Guizot eagerly continued. "About a month ago, in the afternoon, Viscount Leonard's servant came to report that his master had died in his bedroom. I sent someone to investigate, and they found that he had indeed committed suicide by swallowing his sword." Joseph frowned. "How are you sure it was suicide? Was there a suicide note, or had he shown any signs of depression beforehand?" "Not really," Guizot admitted, "but Leonard used his own sword, and nothing was missing. There were no signs of a struggle in the house, and no other injuries on his body. You see, Your Highness, Le Notre fought in the American War. He's 6 foot+, and a skilled fighter. If anyone could force a sword into his mouth in broad daylight without hurting him, well, that person would have to be himself. 6 foot+, nearly 6.5 feet tall. He was really tall." Joseph narrowed his eyes slightly. He had seen similar murder techniques in mystery novels. With no signs of forced entry or suicide notes, the 18th century police, who hadn't attended the academy and had limited tools and training, would likely rule it a suicide. He looked at Guizot and said, "No, besides himself, there's someone else who could do it." "Your Highness is joking," the pudgy mayor chuckled, waving his hand. "Does this person know magic?" Joseph said calmly, "No, he just knows how to treat teeth." "Treat teeth, you mean the dentist?" "Yes, the dentist." The others stared, speechless. A picture formed in their minds, Leonard obediently opening his mouth at the dentist's instruction, the dentist covering his eyes with the white cloth, turning, grabbing the sword hanging on the wall, and stabbing it into his mouth with ease, and blood spurting out. Note 1, because Europe in the 18th century promoted fast and flexible swordsmanship, the swords of nobles were thin and light, making it difficult to wipe their necks, so they often committed suicide by swallowing swords. Moreover, This method of suicide will remain kneeling in prayer after death, which makes it even more popular among nobles. The new book has set sail, begging for collection, recommendation, comments, everything. The young author is grateful. Chapter 5: The Counterattack of the Duke of Orleans. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Guizot, all fired up, called over his guys from the far end of the banquet table and barked. "Caesar, get someone to check if any dentist had contact with Lenat a month back." Joseph paused, then added, "If a dentist visited Lenat's place, the servant would know." But the servant's statement didn't mention. Guizot stopped short. "Wait a minute. Caesar, bring the servant back in for questioning, too." "Yes, sir." Outside City Hall, Le Notre's fiancée had stopped crying. Maybe the guards chased her off, or maybe someone told her they were reopening the case. That afternoon, the portly mayor and a gaggle of City Hall types invited Joseph to dinner. Caesar, the cop, rushed over and whispered to Guizot for a moment. Guizot's eyes lit up. He spun around, gave Joseph a salute, theatrically clutching his chest, and announced, "Your Highness, just as you suspected, Lenat's servant cracked as soon as we brought him back in." He admitted a dentist did visit Lenat's house around the time of the incident. Said he took a bribe to lie for the guy. The Chamber of Commerce president jumped in, all anxious. "Where's the killer?" Caesar searched the dentist's place and found he's an Englishman. Seems his brother fought in the States and was shot by Lenat. This was payback. Guizot cleared his throat. Unfortunately, Caesar, accidentally stabbed him during the pursuit. Hearing this, every official in the room couldn't help but stare at Joseph in amazement and admiration. At lunchtime, the Crown Prince had pieced together the whole murder scenario based on just a few details. The fat mayor immediately chimed in, "Thank goodness for the Crown Prince's wisdom. Otherwise, this guy would have gotten away with it." He smirked, then whispered to an official behind him, "Finally, that woman will stop making a scene at City Hall." That night, Joseph ended up staying at Chamber of Commerce President Fleisel's private villa after much coaxing. City Hall was just too far from Versailles, and he didn't feel like making the trek. Joseph leaned back against the plush pillows of the oversized bed, staring at the opposite wall, bored out of his mind. The mayor and the Chamber of Commerce president had been dancing around him all day, still dead set against him sticking his nose into police business. He tossed and turned, figuring if he couldn't win them over tomorrow, he'd write the Queen and ask her to get him placed in the police department. Outside, Iman gave a light knock on the door. "Your Highness, are you asleep?" "Not yet." "Come in." Iman opened the door and handed Joseph a letter. "Your Highness, this came from the police department. Looks like it's from Mr. Le Notre's fiancée." "Her? A letter to me?" Imang's voice was heavy. "She took her own life tonight." Joseph felt a pang in his chest. He never imagined such a devoted woman existed. He opened the letter. The first few lines were thanks to Caesar and the other officers. Then, she went on to say that she desperately wanted to thank the Crown Prince for finding the real killer, but, given the difference in their stations, she couldn't meet him. This was her only way to express her gratitude. She went on and on for a whole page. At the end, she said that without Le Notre, life wasn't worth living. The police had avenged him, and she was going to join her love. After her death, all her property would be split between the Crown Prince and the police department. Joseph was caught off guard by this gesture. Emin quietly said, "Your Highness, word is Miss Easterly left behind an estate worth 4,000 livres. On the banks of the Seine." The Palais Royal, once a palace of Louis XIV, now belonged to the Duke of Orleans. The Orleans family had served as regents back in the days of Louis XV. They wielded incredible power. A century of accumulating wealth had left them with a fortune nearly rivaling the royal families. The current Duke of Orleans had been steadily building his influence since his father's time, using that wealth as leverage. Though he held no official position, he could attend cabinet meetings and had considerable clout. Plus, he was a master of playing the game and wasn't afraid to spend money. He was a fixture in political circles and well respected among the nobles. A fancy carriage rolled into the Palais Royal and stopped in front of the Flower Gallery. The Duke of Orleans stepped down. Using the step set out by the servants, he could hear a speech coming from the garden. He glanced over, a smile playing on his lips. He knew it was just some meeting of malcontents griping about the royal family. The royal palace was now a hotbed for anti-royal sentiment. The ringleaders of the Feuillants, Girondins, and future Jacobins often met here. You could even find illegal goods for sale, including restricted weapons. The Duke of Orleans used his influence to protect them. He had been working towards this for decades, and he would support anything that might help bring down the royal family. The Duke of Orleans tossed his coat to a servant and strode into the main hall. The guard opened the door, and he saw his son berating a maid. He cleared his throat and stepped forward. "Philip, what's going on here?" That the young man turned around. It was the same narrow-eyed kid who had taken the math test with Joseph that morning. He pointed at the maid, yelling, "This idiot brought me black tea when I was already in a bad mood. And it's scalding hot. What's got you so upset?" "That Joseph." Philip balled his fists. "He must have cheated. No way he's taken college-level courses." That the Duke of Orleans asked what happened and couldn't help but frown. He hadn't expected the Dauphin to impress a genius like Lagrange. Getting rid of Louis XVI had been child's play. Why was his son so capable? He had to cut the crown prince down before he became too popular, or it would be that much harder to overthrow the king. He gave his son a few words of comfort. Then, the housekeeper hurried in, bowing and saying, "Sir, Mr. Froey is here to see you. Isn't he Louisbel's right-hand man? Tell him to wait in the study." In the study, the Duke of Orleans read the letter Froey had brought, sneering as he handed it to the butler. "The crown prince might be a bit sharp, but he's still just a kid. If he'd stayed messing around in City Hall, there's not much I could do about it. But he actually volunteered to get involved in the police." The housekeeper looked at the letter and clucked his tongue. "Paris is always a mess, especially in the slums. Robberies and murders never stop. Even seasoned veterans are stumped. The crown prince is just asking for trouble." Duke Orleans smiled. "Since Joseph is so confident, we'll help him make a name for himself." He turned to Froey. "Go back and tell Louisbel to put the crown prince in charge of the Saint-Antoine district as police commissioner." The police commissioner was the next in command to the chief of police and oversaw all police activity in a specific region of Paris. There were only 6 police commissioners in Paris. "Yes, Your Grace." After Louisbel's man left, the Duke of Orleans told the butler, "Have the Paris News and the Citizen pay extra attention to crime and police activity in the Saint-Antoine district. They can write all about the police chief there, our very own crown prince." "Yes." The butler bowed and left. The Duke of Orleans walked to the window, looking out at the gardens of the royal palace. A smirk crept across his face. Once the Saint-Antoine district descends into chaos, let's see how the Austrian cousin tries to defend her son. The crown prince? Soon, people will think he's as big an idiot as his father, that the Austrian cousin was Queen Mary, who was born in Austria. Chapter 6. Become a small official first. Please recommend the chapter. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Early the next morning, Paris Municipal Commissioner Louisbel spotted the president of the Chamber of Commerce, waved his chubby face, exchanged pleasantries, and then steered the conversation. "So, what do you think about that case the Crown Prince cracked yesterday?" Flysel replied, impressed. "The Crown Prince's intelligence is astounding. I can't wait for the day he leads France." "Couldn't agree more." Louisbel chuckled. "After giving it some thought, I'm convinced His Highness would be a natural as police commissioner." After a bit of coaxing, Flysel was finally swayed. If the Crown Prince himself was keen to join the police department, why not do him a favor? Just then, Joseph walked into City Hall and was greeted by the portly mayor, beaming. "Your Highness," he said, "old Similian, the police commissioner of the St. Anthony district, has taken extended sick leave. I was wondering if you might be interested in filling his shoes. St. Anthony district. The president of the Chamber of Commerce was taken aback. He leaned in and whispered to Mtlnovel, "Why didn't you say where it was? That place is a mess. What if something happens to His Highness?" The city commissioner cut him off quietly. "The Crown Prince won't be out on patrol. He'll be fine." Flysel started to object, but the fat mayor stopped him. "Your Highness, Semillion's people are all seasoned veterans. You'll be in good hands." Joseph was slightly surprised by the sudden change of heart, but he quickly agreed. "All right, I'll take the position." He'd learned yesterday that the police commissioner oversaw all police services in a large district, reporting to the police inspector general. He knew the city hall was unlikely to make him police chief, considering his age. Mtlnovel showered him with more praise, escorted the Crown Prince to the police station, watched the appointment papers get signed, and then left. Well pleased, Joseph wasted no time. Escorted by Police Chief Guizot himself, he headed straight to the St. Anthony district to start his new job. After driving for over an hour, the carriage entered the St. Anthony district, and the surroundings became noticeably more run-down. The residents looked numb, and crumbling shacks lined the streets. Homeless people, reeking of filth, slumped in the corners. Half the shops were shuttered, and only a few vendors dotted the roadside. Prostitutes in cheap dresses solicited customers, bringing a touch of life to the area. Before long, Joseph witnessed several instances of protection money being collected. Later, they stumbled upon two rival gangs in a bloody street fight. Passers-by scattered, heads down, avoiding the carnage. Not a single police officer was in sight. Guizot seemed unfazed by the scene, happily chatting about an upcoming masquerade ball and encouraging the Crown Prince to attend. Joseph thought to himself, no wonder this was ground zero for the French Revolution. Anyone living in these conditions, steeped in poverty, would be simmering with resentment. When it boiled over, it would be devastating, he sighed. He'd arrived in the St. Anthony district at just the right time. Half an hour later, the carriage stopped in front of a small courtyard enclosed by uneven wooden planks. Inside stood a dilapidated building, devoid of any signage. Guizot gestured grandly towards the entrance. "Your Highness, this is the St. Anthony District Police Station." A police officer outside the courtyard spotted the police chief stepping out of the carriage and rushed inside to report. Moments later, several officers scrambled out to greet them. Guizot bowed to Joseph, then addressed the officers, clearing his throat. "His Royal Highness, the Crown Prince, is here. He will be serving as your police commissioner." The assistant beside him brandished the appointment papers. The officers of the St. Anthony District Police Station were stunned. Why would such a big shot come to their small corner of the world? And the Crown Prince was only 13. A police commissioner? The station would be a disaster. After a long pause, a tall, gaunt man with deep-set eyes stepped forward and saluted respectfully. "Your Highness, your arrival is an honor to our humble station. Assistant Police Commissioner Bono, speaking for everyone here, welcomes you sincerely." He gestured towards the officers beside him. "Your Highness, this is Mtlnovel, the security inspector from the second team, and this is the security inspector from the third team." The security inspectors rushed forward to salute, and Joseph returned each salute with a smile. He had seen documents at City Hall stating that the assistant police commissioner was second in command of the police station, while the security inspectors were responsible for police dispatches and patrols, each overseeing about a dozen subordinates, putting them in the middle ranks of the station. Bono and the others ushered Joseph into the police station. Mtlnovel hurried ahead and, with admiration written on his face, said, "Your Highness, I heard from Caesar that you cracked a murder case in just over 10 minutes yesterday. It puts us veteran cops to shame." Joseph was surprised the news had spread so quickly to the St. Anthony district, and quickly offered a few words of modesty. As they entered the dilapidated police station, Joseph frowned, turned to the officers trailing behind him, and told them to get back to work, including Guizot. The room finally quieted. Bono led Joseph to the police commissioner's office. He looked around, then settled into the large oak desk. Bono said with a smile, "Your Highness, would you like tea or hot cocoa? I'll have some refreshments prepared for you right away." "Thank you, no need to bother," Joseph waved his hand. "Please provide me with an overview of the district's situation, including case files and personnel information." Bono was surprised. He thought the Crown Prince was just visiting for a few days, but it seemed he was serious. The documents arrived quickly, and Joseph frowned after just a few pages. Last month alone, the St. Anthony district saw 28 murders, 63 robberies, and 220 thefts, and the district only had a population of 80,000. These were just the reported crimes. He didn't want to imagine how many went unreported. The situation was far worse than he'd thought. Joseph picked up the police personnel files. The entire St. Anthony district had 181 police officers, but only 61 had been hired through merit or recruitment. The rest were paying for the opportunity to be a police officer. There was also a voluntary patrol team formed by local residents, totaling over 200 people. He recalled a documentary he'd seen. The Paris police were notorious for extortion, shaking down everyone from vendors to criminals to victims. As for fighting crime, that could wait. First, they had to earn back the money they'd spent to buy their jobs, so, law and order largely depended on the private patrols, but they were unpaid volunteers, lacked law enforcement authority, and had only rudimentary weapons. They could scare criminals, but not arrest them. That meant the real police force numbered around 60 officers. Chapter 7: Reorganization of the Police Force, Seeking Investment. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After Joseph leafed through the documents at the back, he realized over 180 police officers hadn't been paid properly in 4 months. City Hall kicked in 20% of their salaries, but the Chamber of Commerce was supposed to cover the remaining 80%. The problem was, the chamber often came up short because the merchants wouldn't pony up the cash. This meant the cops were getting shortchanged. Joseph frowned, shaking his head. 60 officers responsible for a huge area with 80,000 people, and they weren't even getting paid? No wonder there were 28 murders that month. Makes you wonder why nobody lifted a finger when those citizens raided Les Invalides for muskets at the start of the French Revolution. People come first. Seems like solving this manpower problem is priority number 1. Joseph thought long and hard, racking his brain for modern policing ideas. He spent hours sketching out a plan for reforming the police force, finally letting out a relieved sigh after adding 4 or 5 pages. He looked down at the first point he'd written: reorganize the civilian patrol team. He buzzed for Assistant Police Commissioner Bono and told him, "Get all the police and civilian patrol teams in St. Anthony District together here tomorrow morning." Bono was taken aback. "Everyone, Your Highness." "That's right, everyone. I'll have Viscount Guizot send over officers from other districts to help patrol. Don't worry about that." "Yes, Your Highness." Joseph turned to Emin, "Have someone fetch 20,000 livres from my personal funds." When dawn broke, nearly 400 police and civilian patrol members were assembled on the open ground in front of the Paris police station, standing in 2 ragged lines. Even though they knew they'd be meeting the Crown Prince, their new boss, seeing the handsome young man in the red double-breasted uniform and tricorn hat standing on the wooden platform still hit them hard. The air crackled with tension and surprise. At 9 a.m., with a roll of drums, Joseph raised his hand and said in a clear voice, "Good morning, gentlemen. I'm not one for long speeches, so listen up. I have 3 points." Even though his voice was young, he spoke with authority. First, all civilian patrol teams in St. Anthony District are being integrated into the police department, effective immediately. They will now be official police. Of course, nobody's forced to join if they don't want to. The civilian patrol guys went wild. Buying your way into the police force usually cost 500 livres. Now, with a word from the Crown Prince, they were all in. The Paris police might not have the best reputation, but it was still a government job with status. They'd banded together to protect their neighborhoods and never dreamed they could become cops. It was like hitting the jackpot. Joseph quieted them down and continued, "Second, you'll all be evaluated. This will include character, physical fitness, and professional skills. Your scores will determine your police rank. Think of it like military ranks: officer, superintendent, and sergeant. As you rise through the ranks, your salaries will increase accordingly. Entry-level cops during the probationary period will earn 18 livres a month. First, second and third-level officers will earn 22, 25 and 30 livres respectively. Superintendents start at 40 livres. He pointed to some wooden boxes nearby. Here are 20,000 livres. You'll receive this month's pay once you've been ranked. From now on, you'll be paid in cash, right here, and there won't be any delays, not even for a day." The place exploded again. 30 livres was nearly as much as a city hall official made, and 22 livres was enough to live on. And he actually had the cash on hand. The Paris police had only been earning 16 livres before, and they'd barely see half that due to deductions. Everyone's eyes were sparkling, lit up by the gleam of silver coins. They were ready to fight for their evaluation scores. Getting ranked as a third-level officer normally took 20 years. Those with a little extra around the middle were suddenly wishing they'd laid off the pastries. Third, Joseph's voice cut through their thoughts, "We're implementing a performance-based system. You'll be evaluated monthly based on factors like crime clearance rates, dispatch numbers, and citizen complaints. Do well, and you get bonuses. Screw up, and you get docked pay. Promotions will also be based on these evaluations." He scanned the crowd. "That's all I have to say. I trust everyone's on board. Let's get this reorganization and evaluation underway, right now. It needs to be completed within 10 days. Yes, Your Highness." The roar shook the very foundations. The former civilian patrol members were beaming, their hands shaking. Shouts of "Long live the Crown Prince" echoed through the square. They never imagined such a chance encounter could change their lives so dramatically. Their futures were full of hope. The Crown Prince had become their savior, practically glowing with divine light. Hundreds of them silently vowed to repay his kindness. Immediately, several of the Crown Prince's guards ran over, each ordered dozens of police officers, and led the entire team away. Joseph's measures were common sense in later years, but in the 18th century, they were groundbreaking. Unified staffing, job specialization, performance appraisals, merit-based promotions, it was all revolutionary. In the original timeline, it wasn't until decades later that Napoleon began police reform. Even then, his reforms didn't go half as far as Joseph's, yet they became the standard for all of Europe. 2 days later, the residents of St. Anthony district started noticing some changes. Wooden boxes with slots in the top were hanging at every intersection. In big letters, they read "Police Complaint Box." Underneath, smaller text explained that citizens could submit their grievances about the police. The police commissioner would personally review and address each complaint, and the results would be made public. In areas where lots of people gathered, wooden shelters were being built. According to the carpenters, these were security booths where officers would stand by to support patrolling police. The novel Lady Please Stop has been completed, a fantasy novel about sexual transformation, and has an audio version. You are welcome to read it. Lady Please Stop synopsis. Once the surgeon traveled through time. He came to a different world where women were strong and men were weak, and there were more women than men. He became Su Yang, the young master of the Su family. Women with strong spiritual powers can move mountains and reclaim seas, reach for stars and block out the sun, and conquer the world with their strength. Su Yang, rely on soft power to conquer the world. Ahem, rely on soft power. Chapter 8 Difficulties. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 3 days later, the Municipal Commissioner's office. Sir, are you aware of the Dauphin's police force reorganization? Froey asked the city commissioner, worry etched on his face. The Duke of Orleans aimed to embarrass him, but now it's backfired spectacularly, and police morale is in the toilet. I'm really worried. Louis carefully selected a bottle of wine from his cabinet. Relax, Froey. Someone will take care of it. Someone? Who? Louisbel held the bottle to the light, admiring the purple liquid. I leaked news about the Crown Prince yesterday. I expect some people are starting to sweat. Just then, Police Chief Guizot knocked and entered, offering a hasty salute. Sir, you must advise His Highness the Crown Prince. Oh. The portly mayor opened the bottle with deliberate slowness. Advise him how? Guizot paced, his leather boots squeaking on the floor. Haven't you heard? His Highness is tearing down the police force. It's going to seriously impact security in the Saint-Antoine district, that he detailed Joseph's reorganization. Honestly, anyone else who pulled a stunt like this would be fired on the spot. But this is the Crown Prince, you understand. Louisbel popped the cork, inhaled the wine's aroma, and shook his head. Viscount Guizot, the Crown Prince's actions are an internal police matter. I can't really comment. Besides, I've been swamped with funding lately. The Chamber of Commerce's resources are limited, and the Crown Prince is hiring tons of new officers. Almost half the police budget is now earmarked for the Saint-Antoine district. How can that be? Guizot exclaimed, shocked. He can't take that much. You have to help me. Louisbel feigned a troubled expression, pondered for a moment, then poured Guizot a glass of wine. A sly smile flickered in his eyes. There might be some wiggle room. Perhaps the Crown Prince will back down when he sees the difficulties. I'll do my best to cooperate. Guizot gave him a long look, took a sip of wine, and nodded firmly before leaving, his face dark. As the door closed, Froey stared at the mayor, surprised. Sir, how did you know Viscount Guizot would come? Louisbel handed him another glass of wine, smiling. The Crown Prince may be capable, but he's still a kid. He only sees what's right in front of him, ignoring the broader consequences. Consequences? Louisbel sipped his wine. Besides the Chamber of Commerce, the police's biggest income stream comes from selling police posts. I spread the word that the Crown Prince is promoting commoners to the force. Anyone planning to buy a position will realize they might not need to bribe their way into the Paris police anymore. Why pay for it now? It's their biggest source of revenue. The mayor swirled his wine. If I cut Guizot's city hall funding, they'll go ballistic. What do you think they'll do? Froey's eyes lit up. They'll do everything to stop the Crown Prince. Exactly. The sun began to set. Police Chief Guizot's carriage finally arrived at the Saint-Antoine District Police Station. Inside Joseph's office, Guizot saluted, a forced smile on his face. Your Highness, this reorganization is truly amazing. The police force has been completely transformed. After buttering him up, he adopted a sorrowful tone. But those civilian patrolmen you've brought in can barely hold a sword. They've never touched a crossbow or musket. They need at least 3 or 4 months of training. Otherwise, they can't even handle street thugs. During their training, their patrol routes will be unattended. You've asked me to transfer over 120 officers from other districts, but those districts are already stretched thin. I need to get back soon. Joseph asked him to sit. It won't take that long. I have a streamlined training method that can get them combat ready in about 10 days. Surely borrowing officers from other districts for 10 days isn't a problem. Of course you can. Guizot's expression grew serious. But training is crucial. We can't rush it. I appreciate the reminder, Joseph replied. Don't worry, I'm aware of that. Okay. Guizot nodded reluctantly, still pushing. Your Highness, there's one more thing. You've brought on over 200 officers, but the police department doesn't have enough equipment for them all. Don't worry about the equipment. I'll handle it. Guizot was frustrated. The problem he'd so carefully constructed was dismissed outright. He raised several more problems related to the police reform, but to no avail. Finally, he gave up, offered a hurried goodbye, and left in a huff. He was utterly confused. It seemed the Crown Prince was determined to turn the police station upside down. I'm afraid there won't be much funding left for the city hall in the future. In reality, Guizot was overthinking it. Joseph didn't even care about the meager funds allocated by the police department. Besides, relying on private commerce for police funding was inherently flawed. With his knowledge of technology and advanced concepts from the future, Joseph had plenty of ways to make money. Plugging France's $2 billion debt hole, and supporting a police system was small potatoes. As the carriage rattled along, Guizot's eyes turned cold. The Crown Prince had to be ousted from the police system immediately. Things needed to return to normal. Shortly after Guizot departed, two elegant carriages arrived at the Saint-Antoine police station. Louis XVI's valet emerged, adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses, and frowned at the rundown station. After confirming it was the correct address, he hurried inside with his servant. After greeting Joseph with proper courtly etiquette, he respectfully presented a letter. "Your Highness, this is a letter from His Majesty the King." He then signaled to the servant, who opened a carved wooden box. "Her Majesty the Queen heard you didn't even bring a royal chef. She had these made, worried you wouldn't eat well." Joseph peered into the box, which was filled with intricately decorated cakes, strawberry tarts, cream puffs, and candies. He sighed and smiled. He knew he was being watched, but he also recognized Queen Mary's genuine affection. He opened the sealed envelope, unfolded the letter, and read Louis's elegant Italian script. "My dear Joseph, I hope this letter brings you my warmest thoughts and affection. As your father, I want to express my profound concern for you. Guess what? I finally finished Salamander Squirt. I swear to God, it's my most incredible work." He continued for a page, describing his lock. "The first person I wanted to share it with was you, but then I discovered you'd gone to work for City Hall. Forgive me, I've been locked in the workshop far too long and didn't even know. How are you managing in Paris? Your mother is beside herself. You're only 13 years old. You shouldn't have to suffer like this. This is what Brian and the others should be doing. Oh, and I heard you finished college. How on earth did you manage that? Incredible. I'm so proud. Son, you're the pride of the entire royal family. I know that in the future, you'll restore France to the glory of the Sun King." A full page of praise. "Joseph, I hear you're reforming the police department and doing a fantastic job. Excellent. Do whatever you think is best. If anything goes wrong, I'll take the heat. I'll always support you. If you get tired, come back to Versailles. Your mother is always worried you're not eating properly. Finally, I want you to know that no matter where you are, you'll always be my beloved son. 1,000 kisses." Although the letter was dripping with French sentimentality, Joseph felt the deep love within. He took a deep breath. His parents in his previous life had been in poor health and passed away when he was in college. It had been so long since he experienced family warmth. Now, his heart swelled with affection. He hoped he could live a long, safe life with his family in this world. My new book has begun. Please collect it, recommend it, and comment. Thank you for your support. The young author is grateful. Chapter 9 Results. Please vote for me. You are listening at novelfull.audio. In the blink of an eye, Joseph had been running the police force for 10 days. Dust swirled in front of the St. Anthony District Police Station. Over 200 new recruits, decked out in sharp blue uniforms and blue and white hats, sweated as they practiced with odd-looking weapons. Joseph had secured these uniforms from the army stationed outside Paris at the cost of several thousand livres. Since police uniforms were practically unheard of in France, or even Europe, the St. Anthony District Police were decades ahead of their time in appearance alone. When it came to weapons, Joseph skipped the musket. They didn't require much training, and were only a small step up from a glorified fire stick. He also avoided arming the force with a bunch of swords. Instead, he had carpenters build over 200 6-foot-long, Y-shaped wooden forks. Plus, every pair of officers got a shield. Simple as they looked, these were highly effective. Later on, you'd see airport and station security using the same setup. With the right formation, they were excellent for riot control. These new police officers, recruited from the lowest rungs of Parisian society, treasured their positions. They trained 10 hours a day without complaint. Joseph surveyed the training ground with satisfaction. Starting at noon, this brand new force would begin patrolling the St. Anthony district. Of course, serious criminal investigations would still be handled by the 60 veteran officers. As for those who'd bought their way onto the force, Joseph had essentially relegated them to logistics, cleaning, moving supplies, that kind of thing, with the lowest pay. Today, the St. Antoine District Police Station boasts 50 detectives, 236 patrol officers, and 125 support staff, making it a force to be reckoned with in Paris. These 280-plus officers were highly motivated, not like the scoundrels who usually populated the district police. More importantly, these were men who would actually uphold the law, a stark contrast to the old guard whose primary skill was extortion. Their sense of duty was tenfold higher than that of their predecessors. This was a modern police force, plain and simple. The sun blazed. After lunch, on Joseph's command, nearly 300 officers marched out of the station in formation, shouting slogans, and officially took over security in the St. Anthony district. They'd already been patrolling the area informally, so they knew the trouble spots. Now, with formal authority and a modern management system, their ability to fight crime had doubled. The citizens had heard the news, but aside from glancing at the police's impressive new uniforms, they paid little attention. What else could they expect from the French police? Over in the east side of St. Antoine district, on Rue Ole, vulgar shouts echoed from a back alley. 4 or 5 tough guys in black vests and felt hats had cornered a middle-aged man, brandishing clubs and an iron axe. "How dare you owe the Viper gang money? You've had it coming," that the middle-aged man cowered. "Please, sirs, I'll pay it next week. For God's sake. You're 3 payments behind this year," a red-haired man said with a grin, gesturing to his men. "The rules say you need a lesson." "No, please," before the man could finish, one of the thugs slammed a club down on his arm. The sound of bone cracking filled the air, followed by an inhuman scream. The red-haired man ground the man's face into the dirt with his boot. "Remember, next week. Default again, and you lose another hand." Suddenly, 4 men in blue uniforms and wide-brimmed hats appeared at the alley's entrance, staring at the injured man groaning on the ground. The red-haired man recognized 2 of them. "Baptiste and Quillian. Heard you 2 became cops. Those outfits look good on you." These 2 used to be civilian patrolmen, and knew the Viper gang well. The red-haired man brandished his knife. "I'm here to collect, so get out of the way." Quillian pulled out a whistle and blew it hard, pointing at the gang members. "You're committing assault in the street. I'm arresting you." That he used to be a tanner. For his family's safety, he'd volunteered for the patrol, walking the streets from 6 to 11 every night. When they ran into guys like the Viper gang, they avoided them if they could, but now he was a real cop, making 35 livres a month. His wife and kids had white bread every day, and meat sometimes. He'd only dreamed of this before. Now he only wanted to do one thing: uphold the law in this district, protect his family's happiness, and repay the Crown Prince. Besides, catching more criminals meant a better performance record. And a better record meant bigger bonuses. He and the other 3 officers shouted, "In the name of the Crown Prince. Go!" The red-haired man scoffed and waved at his crew. "Teach these idiots a lesson," he was confident. Even real police were just tough talkers, timid guys who'd run crying at the sight of blood. But this time, he was wrong. The 3 policemen pulled the 6-foot-long, Y-shaped wooden forks off their backs, moved forward in formation, and used them to block the 2 Viper gang members charging at them. The head of the fork was as wide as a man's arm, easy to hit with your eyes closed. This was a modern security tool, the riot control fork. Another policeman with a spear saw his chance and jabbed the gang member on the left in the foot. The man screamed and fell, clutching his foot. The thug next to him snarled, swinging his dagger, but the wooden fork blocked every blow. Furious, the red-haired man charged. But the riot police blocked him and his men. The red-haired man couldn't get close to the police. Instead, 2 of his men were attacked by spears and stabbed in the calf. The red-haired man felt humiliated. His years of fighting skills, honed from living on the knife's edge, were useless against the police's strange formation. This was the security fighting method Joseph had taught the force. It's common in stations and airports to delay the enemy and easy to learn in a week. The red-haired man gritted his teeth, unable to figure out why these police officers were so tough today. He decided to cut his losses, waved his hand and shouted, "Retreat!" But at a security booth halfway down the street, the police had heard the whistle and sent 4 reinforcements. They arrived at the alley just as the Viper gang was trying to escape. The lead officer shouted, "In the name of the Crown Prince." 3 riot control forks slammed into place, blocking their path. Chapter 10 Big Chaos. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The Viper gang barely put up a fight before the cops pinned them with those wooden riot forks. They were on the ground, faces twisted with fear. Quillian thanked the other officers who'd come to back him up and started tying up the gangsters, one by one. That same scene was playing out all over St. Anton that day. The cops were like they were possessed. The moment they saw someone breaking the law, they charged, yelling, "In the name of the Crown Prince," and proceeded to give the punks a serious beatdown with riot forks and spears. Suddenly, every thief, robber, and gang member in St. Anton was running scared. Their swagger was gone. The residents of St. Anton were shocked and thrilled to see the police actually fighting crime. Gang members and murderers who'd been getting away with everything were getting hauled off to jail. They'd never seen the police take law and order so seriously. People back then didn't expect much from law enforcement. If you got robbed, you just chalked it up to bad luck. As long as you were alive, you were grateful. But now, the new police force was blowing their minds. Before long, people were bringing the cops water and food, cheering them on as they hauled criminals down the street. The cops, feeling the love, started working even harder, and it didn't take long for the citizens to figure out a new trick. If you saw a crime, yelling in the name of the Crown Prince had a good chance of sending the bad guys running. Palais Royal, the Duke of Orleans glared at the Paris news on his desk, looking like he was about to spit nails. The front page headline screamed, "Security in Antony District, Crown Prince oversees police reform." Compared to the vague, wishy-washy coverage in his own newspaper, the tabloids were blunt. Dauphin cleans up police, St. Anton safe again. St. Anton citizens hail new police force. Crown Prince a genius, solves dentist murder in 3 minutes. The Duke was fuming. He'd wanted to use the crime wave in St. Anton to embarrass the Crown Prince, but it had backfired and made him a hero. Joseph had completely turned around the police force in just over 10 days. A 13-year-old couldn't pull that off on his own. He frowned. Could it be that his Austrian cousin was using her son to clean up the corrupt officials in Paris, starting with the police? The more he thought about it, the more it made sense. There was no way the young Crown Prince could be doing this all by himself. That would mess up the Queen's plans even more. He couldn't let the royal family cause any trouble. The Duke scribbled a quick note, summoned his butler, and ordered, "Get this to Louisbert and tell him to get it done, no matter what. I might even consider helping him become governor of Normandy." "Yes, sir." In a small villa on the east bank of the Seine, Paris Police Chief Guizot squinted at the slightly open door and snapped at his mistress, who was obviously eavesdropping. "Anna, close the door and keep the servants away." "Fine," she muttered, slamming the door shut and stomping off. "Treating me like a maid in my own house." Guizot turned back to the short, curly-haired man in front of him, took a long drag from his pipe, and said, "Semelian, the Crown Prince isn't going back to Versailles. He's practically living at the police station." The short man, the former St. Anton police commissioner who was currently on sick leave, looked panicked. "But the municipal commissioner said I'd be back on the job in 2 months, tops. Who knew it would blow up like this?" Guizot sighed, exhaling smoke. "Now not only you, but the Crown Prince himself is a major problem for the entire police department." He stared at Semelian. "I've got something for you." If you pull it off, you'll not only get your job back, you'll get promoted. Similian's eyes lit up. Anything, sir. Just tell me what to do. You know Saint Anton better than anyone. Who are the biggest gangs? The Hoth gang and the Black Sheep gang, Similian replied. They control over 80% of the territory, and each has hundreds of guys. Guizot nodded, pulled out a piece of paper, and handed it to him, a glint of madness in his eyes. Go find them. Tell them to raise hell in Saint Anton. Dismember bodies, rape women, kidnap people, set fires. I want complete chaos. This. Similian gasped, staring at the paper. After a moment, he nodded quickly. Okay, complete chaos. He glanced at the paper again, jumped up, and stammered, 30,000 livres. It was a money order for 30,000 livres. Back then, 20,000 could buy you a villa in Paris. 30,000 was a fortune, enough to make any gang go wild. That's just a little something, Guizot said, gesturing for him to sit down. Tell the gang members, for every act of chaos they create, they get 1,000 livres. After a month, whoever's caused the most mayhem gets another 20,000. Yes, sir. Similian's hands trembled. All right, get to it. Guizot looked at him intently. And remember, if anything goes wrong, the big shots behind me will take care of it. But officially, this is all your idea. Got it? I have nothing to do with it. Yes. I understand. Don't worry. Guizot watched Similian hurry away, a smirk playing on his lips. He hadn't planned to go this far, but yesterday Louvel had told him to cut loose and go wild. If things got too hot, he'd cover for him. So now, Guizot felt free to unleash. Your Highness, enjoying the good life in Versailles, but you had to come play in the mud, he muttered, gritting his teeth. 3 days later, Saint Anton Parish Police Department. Joseph was under a tree, reading through citizens' letters of praise, mostly about the police, when Public Security Inspector Magoni came running, breathless, saluting. Your Highness, we've got another one. 2 people dead in a shoe store on by Iris Street. The store's been burned down. Joseph's brow furrowed. Since the day before yesterday, Saint Anton had been hit by a wave of violent crimes. 2 dead the day before, 3 dead yesterday, plus 2 more seriously injured. He'd thought it was a coincidence, but this was too much. What's the situation? Arden's already on the scene with his men, Magoni said. The fire's out, but they haven't caught the perp yet. Joseph rushed back inside and started organizing a response. As dusk approached, Arden was briefing Joseph on the White Iris Street case when another officer rushed in, bringing more bad news. The Black Sheep gang had gone berserk on Mtlnovel Street, slashing people at random. 7 or 8 passers-by were down, and they needed backup ASAP.